After 30 years as a social worker, 58-year-old Linda Martinez thought she'd seen every possible twist in family dynamics. From her office in downtown San Antonio, she'd helped place hundreds of children in loving homes, reunited families torn apart by circumstances, and witnessed both the best and worst of human nature. But the case file that landed on her desk on a humid Thursday morning in September 2024 contained a coincidence so extraordinary that it made her question whether some things in life really are meant to be. What Linda discovered inside that manila folder would prove that sometimes our professional lives and personal histories are more connected than we could ever imagine, and that some circles take 20 years to close. Linda had built her career on helping families navigate the complex world of child welfare and adoption. She'd started as a caseworker fresh out of graduate school at UT San Antonio in 1994, driven by her own experience growing up in the foster care system. Her childhood had been difficult, bounced between homes, never quite finding her place until she aged out of the system at 18. That experience had shaped her mission: to ensure that every child in her care found the stability and love she desperately sought as a young person. By 2024, Linda had risen to supervisor level at the Department of Family and Protective Services. She oversaw a team of 12 caseworkers, managed complex cases involving parental rights termination, and specialized in placing older children and sibling groups, the hardest cases that other workers struggled with. Colleagues respected her for her calm competence and her ability to find solutions where others saw only problems. What they didn't know was that Linda's dedication to her work was fueled by a personal loss that she'd never fully processed. In 1998, when Linda was 32 and finally feeling stable in her career and personal life, she'd discovered she was pregnant. The father was Mark Rodriguez, a teacher she'd been dating for 2 years. They'd been talking about marriage, about building a family together, when everything fell apart. Mark was offered a job in Denver that he couldn't turn down. Linda was established in San Antonio, deeply involved in her work, supporting her elderly grandmother who'd been the only stable figure in her childhood. The relationship couldn't survive the distance, and Mark moved to Colorado without knowing Linda was pregnant. Linda had made the difficult decision to place her daughter for adoption. At 32, she was financially stable and could have raised the child. But she was also honest about her limitations. She worked 60-hour weeks, had no family support system, and worried that her own childhood trauma had left her unprepared for motherhood. She'd chosen a young couple through Catholic Charities, Maria and Jose Gonzalez, who seemed perfect. He was a mechanic. She was a teacher. They'd been trying to have children for 5 years and promised to love Linda's daughter as their own. The adoption had been open initially, with visits and letters for the first 2 years. Linda had watched her daughter, Isabella, grow from an infant into a bright, happy toddler. But gradually, the Gonzalez family had reduced contact. They'd moved to a different neighborhood, changed jobs, and eventually stopped responding to Linda's requests for updates. By the time Isabella was 4, Linda had lost all contact. She'd respected the family's wishes for privacy, even though it broke her heart. For 20 years, Linda had wondered about her daughter, hoped she was happy, and carried the guilt that maybe she'd made the wrong choice. On that September morning, Linda was reviewing cases that needed immediate attention when her supervisor, Janet Patterson, handed her a thick file marked "Urgent, Placement Needed." The case involved a 20-year-old woman named Isabella Maria Gonzalez, who was seeking to place her newborn son for adoption. The young woman had specifically requested an experienced worker who understood the complexities of adoption, and her situation was time-sensitive. Linda opened the file and began reading the intake notes. Isabella Gonzalez, born September 15, 2004, in San Antonio. Parents: Maria and Jose Gonzalez. The young woman was unmarried, attending community college part-time while working at a local restaurant. She'd become pregnant with a coworker who'd abandoned her when she told him about the baby. Sound familiar? Linda thought grimly. The young woman wanted to place her son with a family who could provide opportunities she couldn't offer. As Linda read deeper into the file, details began to feel familiar in a way that made her hands tremble. Isabella had been born at Baptist Medical Center, the same hospital where Linda had given birth. The adoptive parents' names were Maria and Jose Gonzalez, the same couple who'd adopted Linda's daughter 20 years earlier. But it was the birth date that made Linda's heart stop. September 15, 2004. Exactly the date Linda's daughter had been born. Linda stared at the file for a full minute, her mind racing. This couldn't be coincidence. Isabella Gonzalez had to be her daughter, the baby she'd placed for adoption 20 years ago. And now, 20 years later, that same daughter was sitting in the DFPS waiting room, seeking to place her own child for adoption, and had been assigned to Linda's caseload. Linda's first instinct was to excuse herself from the case. Professional ethics clearly dictated that she couldn't handle an adoption involving her own birth daughter. But something held her back. Isabella was alone, scared, and needed help immediately. The baby was already 3 days old, and time was critical for placement. More importantly, Linda realized this might be her only chance to help her daughter in a meaningful way, to be there for her during one of the most difficult decisions of her life. Linda made a choice that could have cost her career. She decided to meet with Isabella first, to see if her suspicions were correct, and then determine the best course of action. She asked Janet to give her 30 minutes before sending Isabella in, claiming she needed to review the case thoroughly. In reality, Linda needed time to compose herself and figure out how to handle what might be the most important professional and personal moment of her life. When Isabella walked into Linda's office, all doubt disappeared. The young woman was beautiful, olive skin, dark hair, and Linda's own unusual gray-green eyes. She moved with a grace that reminded Linda of her own grandmother, and when she spoke, her voice had the same slight rasp that Linda had inherited from her mother. This was definitely her daughter, 20 years older, but unmistakably the baby Linda had kissed goodbye in the hospital. Isabella seemed nervous but determined. She sat across from Linda's desk and began explaining her situation with a maturity that impressed Linda. She'd gotten pregnant by someone she'd thought cared about her, but he'd made it clear he wanted nothing to do with the baby. Her adoptive parents, Maria and Jose, were supportive but struggling financially. Jose had been laid off from his job at the auto shop, and Maria was working double shifts as a nurse's aide to make ends meet. They couldn't help with a baby, and Isabella knew she couldn't raise a child while working and going to school. "I want my son to have the opportunities I had," Isabella said, tears in her eyes. "My birth mother made a difficult choice to give me up for adoption, and my parents, Maria and Jose, gave me a wonderful life. They couldn't have children of their own, and they loved me like I was their biological daughter. I want to find a family like that for my baby." Linda's heart broke and soared simultaneously. Her daughter spoke about her with gratitude, not resentment. Maria and Jose had clearly been good parents, had given Isabella the love and stability Linda had hoped for. But now Isabella was facing the same impossible choice Linda had made 20 years earlier. "Tell me about your birth mother," Linda said carefully. "Do you ever think about her?" Isabella's expression grew thoughtful. "All the time. My parents always told me she was young and couldn't take care of me, but that she loved me very much. They said she was a social worker who wanted to help children, and that she chose them very carefully. I've always wanted to thank her, to let her know that her sacrifice gave me a good life." Linda had to excuse herself to the bathroom, where she cried quietly for 5 minutes before returning to her office. Isabella had been told Linda was a social worker. Maria and Jose had remembered and shared that detail. Her daughter had grown up knowing that her birth mother had cared about her profession, her calling to help children. When Linda returned, she made a decision that went against every protocol she'd ever learned. "Isabella," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "what if I told you that your birth mother never stopped thinking about you? What if I told you that she became a social worker because she wanted to help children the way she wished she could have helped you? What if I told you that she's spent 20 years hoping you were happy and loved? Isabella looked at Linda more carefully, really studying her face for the first time. Linda saw the moment when Isabella noticed the eye color, the facial structure, the way Linda's hands shook slightly. Are you... Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. Are you my birth mother? Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. I gave birth to you on September 15th, 2004 at Baptist Medical Center. I chose Maria and Jose Gonzalez because they seemed like the most loving people I'd ever met. I've thought about you every single day for 20 years. What happened next surprised them both. Instead of anger or confusion, Isabella felt a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. She stood up and walked around Linda's desk, pulling her birth mother into a hug that lasted several minutes. I prayed I'd find you someday, Isabella whispered. I never imagined you'd be the person helping me with my son. Over the next several hours, Linda and Isabella talked about everything. Linda's childhood in foster care, her reasons for the adoption, Isabella's life with Maria and Jose, her dreams for college and her future. They also discussed the immediate situation, Isabella's newborn son, who was still in the hospital waiting for placement. Linda knew she had to recuse herself from the case officially, but she also knew she could help Isabella navigate the system in ways that would benefit both her and the baby. She called Janet Patterson and explained the situation, requesting that another worker be assigned while Linda provided informal support as Isabella's birth mother. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Isabella decided to proceed with the adoption, and Linda helped her find a family that reminded them both of Maria and Jose, a young couple who'd been trying to have children for years and who promised to love Isabella's son with the same devotion Maria and Jose had shown Isabella. The adoption was finalized in November 2024, with both Linda and Isabella present for the placement. Watching her daughter make the same difficult but loving choice Linda had made 20 years earlier was both heartbreaking and healing. Isabella handled it with grace and wisdom that made Linda incredibly proud. Today, Linda and Isabella have built a beautiful relationship that honors both Linda's role as birth mother and the loving family who raised Isabella. Maria and Jose welcomed Linda into their extended family, grateful for the gift she'd given them 20 years ago and understanding of the bond between Linda and Isabella. Isabella returned to college and is studying social work, inspired by both Linda's career and her own experience with adoption. She visits Linda regularly, and they often volunteer together at adoption support groups, helping other families navigate the complex emotions involved in placing and receiving children. Linda's grandson visits regularly too. The adoptive family, Sarah and Michael Thompson, have embraced the extended family connections and believe that love multiplied is never divided. The little boy will grow up knowing all the women who loved him, his adoptive mother, his birth mother Isabella, and his birth grandmother Linda, who helped bring his adoption story full circle. The case that brought Linda and Isabella together has become legendary in their office, a reminder that sometimes the most professional situations can become deeply personal, and that some coincidences are too meaningful to be mere chance. Linda often tells new social workers that their work isn't just about helping strangers. Sometimes, if they're very lucky, they get the chance to help their own family find their way home. Have you ever experienced a moment when your professional life unexpectedly intersected with your personal history? Sometimes the work we chooses us back in the most unexpected ways. Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories about family, fate, and the connections that bind us together across time. Next week, we'll share the story of a wedding planner who couldn't take her eyes off a bride, and the 28-year secret that made that wedding day unforgettable for all the wrong reasons.